Hi, Amrita. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Amrita Sanyal. I'm a mother of two boys, aged 14 and 8 respectively. I'm a portfolio manager with a large asset management firm, and I've been working in the finance industry for 21 years now.
Wow, that's a long time. So where were you in your career when kids entered the scene?
So I was actually quite early on in my career, and I have a funny anecdote because I was interviewing with my current employer, and after the interviews, I found out that I was pregnant, and the headhunter called and said, "Oh, they would like to make an offer," and I was. I had to tell them that. I said, "I'm sorry, but the circumstances have changed. I've just found out that I'm pregnant, so I'm not sure they'll want to still make the offer." But he was quite sure that they would want to make the offer, and it's the right thing to do, and they can't discriminate because you are pregnant. But I still insisted on going and meeting the hiring manager before I joined, because I didn't want to start a relationship where they would doubt the fact that I actually didn't know when I was interviewing, and I wasn't trying to hide the fact that I was pregnant.
So that brings me to a question. Do you think that we women feel that we are lesser when we are pregnant in the working world?
So I think for me, the thing that when you say, whether we are lesser, I think that's the mom guilt. For me, it happened after I had the child, because before when I was pregnant, I was like, I didn't think anything was holding me back by that time. But it was still, I felt guilty because I was going to go on maternity leave, and they had hired me. It was a small team. They would have to find maternity cover, and at the back of my head, and I was just like, it was a new relationship. I hadn't built that trust, and I hadn't proven myself, so they didn't know whether I was a good worker, dedicated, and I kept imagining that, they must be thinking that she was being deceitful or wanted this to change a job and has taken a job. So I think these were my own concerns coming from my own thoughts.
After you got the job, you went on maternity leave. How long was your maternity leave for?
So I work in London in the UK, and here typically you can take up to a year of maternity leave, of which you have about 4 months of paid leave, and then after that, the government gives you a statutory nominal amount every week. For me, it was slightly different because I joined when I was already pregnant, so I wasn't entitled to any maternity leave. So it was actually totally up to me. I could have taken a year of maternity leave, but I went back after 6 months because, firstly, again, because of my own desire and need to prove that I was a dedicated worker, and they did the right thing by hiring me. And also, even in the middle of the biggest financial crisis of 2008. Where banks were shutting left, right, and center, people were losing jobs. So I was very insecure, and I wanted to go back and secure my position.
Got it. And did it ever, like in your 21 years of career, did it ever happen to you that you felt overwhelmed and you were at the point of quitting?
Absolutely, and it happened. Before my first son turned a year. Because I went back to work when he was 6 months old, left him in a nursery. And as it happens, they go to nursery, they get all sorts of viruses and germs and fall sick, and he would pass it on to me, and I would fall sick, and then I would constantly have to juggle, a sick child and a very demanding job. To make things more complicated, I was also studying for my CFA level 2. So I had to study, and it became too overwhelming. And I was in office one day, and I got up and I told my line manager I would like to take my core leave. And in the finance industry, there is a concept of core leave where we are supposed to take mandatory 10 consecutive days off, and we call it the core leave. And she was like, yes, sure, when do you want to take your core leave? And I was like, starting now. I just couldn't carry on, I felt, any longer. And she was like, yes, please, sure, I'll help you pack up. And I came home and I basically used those 2 weeks to rest, to rethink, to call my mother from India, to call in the resources.
So you also mentioned mom guilt, right? You talked about having mom guilt. What is your advice? How can one overcome this mom guilt, and where do you think it stems from?
So what is mom guilt? First, I'll address what is mom's guilt. According to me, mom guilt is when you're in office, you're trying to pretend that you don't have a child at home. And you're like all the other men who don't have to worry about a sick child or rushing back home to pick the child up from nursery, in most cases. I shouldn't generalize. And when you're at home, you're trying to pretend that you don't have a job and you don't have deadlines to meet. And you're there for the child and the family. And I think that's where it emerges for, at least for me. And how does one get rid of it? I think by taking a step back and actually, reassessing your role as a parent. Because if you have a supportive husband or a partner who's an equal parent, and you think of it as a joint responsibility and not just something that you have to fulfill, I think it'll help reduce that guilt, because you don't have to do it all alone.
Talking about workplace, like if you could wave a magic wand, what policies or changes would you want at the workplace that would make a difference for working moms?
I would say flexibility. And I think COVID has probably already brought a lot of flexibility for a lot of us. Personally, I was never allowed to work from home before COVID because I'm a portfolio manager. I trade, and now I have a hybrid setup where I go to office 2 to 3 days a week and work from home the rest of the time. And it helps me balance my work life and, again, feel less guilty and etc. And I think what would really help is if employers and organizations think about flexibility and think about the needs of working mothers and actually have a conversation before deciding on these policies, because every working mother doesn't have the same requirement or the same flexibility. Because somebody, for example, would want to work, say, 4 days a week. Somebody might want to do a job share with somebody else. Somebody might want reduced hours. Somebody might want to work the same hours, but want breaks during the day to either feed their child or drop them to a nursery, pick them up from nursery. So if employers can actually take that feedback on board and give flexibility, and of course you can't cater to everybody's needs, but I think a little bit of mindfulness that, one policy will not work for every mother will go a long way in retaining women and attracting women and having women thrive in their careers.
Do you have a favorite parenting story you'd like to share?
Well, I have so many, but I think I'll share the one because I've spoken about mom guilt. So I have a story around that. So when my son was around 3 years old, I was sitting for my CFA level 2 for the third time because I'd failed the first 2 attempts. So my husband thought it would be a good idea to give me some alone time to concentrate on my studies. And he planned a trip where he was taking my son from London to Abu Dhabi by himself and meeting his brother and his family there. And that was the first time I was going to be without my son. And it's the first time he was going to go on a plane without his mother. And I had this huge guilt that, he might get emotional, he might start missing me and crying. So I planned the whole day in advance, and I discussed it and, went over it in my head and how it's going to happen and what he must be feeling. Then, I'll say bye to him in the morning, then go to work and not go to the airport so that he doesn't get emotional. And once my husband reached the airport, I kept calling to check how he was doing. So after I think maybe 3 or 4 calls, they were finally about to take off. And I called my husband and said, okay, let me see that one last bye before you take off. And so my husband is sitting next to my 3-year-old and says, your mama wants to speak to you. And his reaction was, again? And I heard that. And I literally had tears in my eyes, because here I am going through this guilt and thinking that, oh, my child is going to be distraught without me and is going to miss me. How's he going to cope? And the child is absolutely fine, because the child is with the other parent, which is what I did not remember or think of, because I am not the only parent in his life. He is going on a holiday with another parent. And I think that is really something we need to focus on.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Amrita. This was a great conversation, and thank you again for your time.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.